So let's take a look at sequences. So to give a basic intro on sequences, they're usually written as a sub n equals some function in terms of n. And so what you do with a sequence is you write out, so let's say we have to write out the first three terms of the sequence. All we're doing is listing out the terms. So we'll have a sub 1, which is referred to as the first term, comma a sub 2, the second term, comma a sub 3. And notice how for 1, all we have to do is plug 1 in for n. And then for the second term, we plug in 2 for n. And for the third term, we plug in 3 for n. And you can go on and on as much as you want. But that is what basically a sequence is. So let's say we have the sequence a sub n equals 1 minus 0.2 to the n power. And we're trying to list the first 5 terms of the sequence. So in order to find the first term, a sub 1, all we have to do is plug 1 in to our sequence equation. So first thing I'm going to do is actually rewrite 0.2 as 2 over 10 or 1 over 5. So I have a sub n equals 1 minus 1 over 5 to the n power, because now it's easier to evaluate. So a sub 1, all I'm going to do is plug in 1 for n. So then I'll get 1 minus 1/5 to the first power, which is just 1/5, which is going to equal 4/5. Now a sub 2, or the second term in the sequence, I'm just going to have to plug in 2 for n. So we'll get 1 minus 1/5 squared, which is just 1 over 25. So then I'll get 24 over 25. For a sub 3, obviously, once again, I'm going to have to plug in 3 to find my third term in the sequence. So we'll get 1 minus 1/5 to the third power, or 1 over 125, which is going to be equal to 124 over 125. So then in order to find a sub 4, obviously we're going to plug in the 4 for n, so we'll get 1 minus 1/5 to the fourth power, so you get 1 over 625, which equals 624 over 625. And then finally a sub 5 is going to equal 1 minus 1/5 to the fifth power. So that is going to be 1 over 3125, which is going to be equal to 3124 over 3125. So if I were to list out the first 5 terms, I would just write out what I got. So I got 4/5 as my first term, then 24 over 25, then 124 over 125, followed by 624 over 625, and finally 3124 over 3125. And you can also put this in decimal form if you want to. So now let's say for number 2 we have to list out the first 5 terms of 3 times negative 1 to the n power over n factorial. Now remember, whenever you're evaluating a factorial you just have to multiply by all the numbers less than it until you get to 1. So if we have 4 factorial, in order to evaluate, that's just going to be equal to 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And then 3 factorial is going to be 3 times 2 times 1. And then if you have 10 factorial, obviously 10 times 9 times 8 all the way until you get to 1. And this is good to remember, but 0 factorial is actually going to be equal to 1. And the easiest way to think about it is how many ways can you arrange 0 things? And that is only one way. So now on to listing the terms, a sub 1, or the first term in the sequence, is going to be 3 times negative 1 to the first over 1 factorial. So in order to evaluate that, negative 1 to the first is negative 1, negative 1 times 3 is negative 3, and 1 factorial is obviously just 1 times 1, which is 1. So that will give us negative 3. Now the second term, a sub 2, is going to be 3 times negative 1 squared over 2 factorial. So negative 1 squared is 1, 1 times 3 is 3, and 2 factorial is 2 times 1, which is going to give us 3/2. For a sub 3, we'll get 3 times negative 1 cubed over 3 factorial. Negative 1 cubed is negative 1, so we'll get negative 3 over 3 factorial, so 3 times 2 times 1, so we'll get negative 3 over 6, or negative 1/2. In order to find a sub 4, we have to plug in 4, so 3 times negative 1 to the 4th power over 4 factorial. Negative 1 to the 4th is 1, so then we'll get 1 times 3, which is 3, over 4 factorial, which is 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. That's going to give us 3 over 24, which is 1 over 8. And then finally, a sub 5, or the 5th term in the sequence, is going to be 3 times negative 1 to the 5th power over 5 factorial. So then negative 1 to the 5th is negative 1, so we'll get negative 3 over 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And so 5 factorial is going to be equal to 120. So we'll get negative 3 over 120, or negative 1 over 40 when simplified. So in order to write out the first 5 terms, we just write out what we got. So a sub 1 is obviously negative 3, followed by 3 halves, followed by negative 1 half, followed by 1/8, and we get negative 1 over 40. And also notice how it will change from negative to positive every other term. And that is because of a alternator here, so negative 1 to the n power. So that will be an important role, or that will play an important role when it comes to series, and specifically the alternator series.